Michael, how are you?
I found something really interesting.
The whole housing market is propped up on these bad loans. They will fail.
The housing market is rock solid.
It's a time bomb.
So Mike Burry, who gets his hair cut at Supercuts and doesn't wear shoes, knows more than Alan Greenspan.
Dr. Mike Burry, yes, he does.
You know what? I'm pissed off. American people are getting screwed by the big banks. And I am getting madder and madder.
It's unbelievable.
Then this guy walks into my office and says,
there's some shady stuff going down.
All the banks were having a big old party. A few outsiders saw when no one else could. The whole world economy might collapse.
I'm sure the world's banks have more incentives than greed.
you're wrong.
No one's paying attention.
The banks got greedy, and we can profit off of their stupidity.
You want to bet against the banks?
I think we're either high or having a stroke. Kind of brilliant.
Fraud has never, ever worked. Eventually, things go south. When the hell did we forget all that?
How can the banks let this happen? It's fueled by stupidity.
But that's not stupidity, that's fraud.
Tell me the difference between stupid and illegal, and I'll have my wife's brother arrested.
You have any idea what you just did? You just bet against the American economy.
If you're wrong, you can lose it all. The banks defrauded the American people. Now we can kick them in the teeth.
Okay, here we go.
You target strippers.
With bad loans.
And they're all cash rich.
You're not going to be able to refinance.
On all my loans,
What do you mean, all your loans?
I have 5 houses and a condo.
I don't know if you've seen the movie The Big Short, or if you did, how you felt about it when you left the theater, but when we left, my husband said to me, "You got to be very careful about how you preach about this. This might be another climate change." And I can understand why, because we are enmeshed in Calgary in a capitalistic system that has really benefited a lot of people. But I want to make a distinction at the very beginning. There is a difference between producing goods and services and making money off nothing, right? So I want to make that clear before we go on. But when I left the movie theater, I was angry and frustrated and a little bit scared, because I had a general idea of how the financial crisis happened in 2008. But I wasn't aware of all the intricacies of the dealings, the incompetence of the regulators, and the fraudulent activities that ran all through the financial system. It almost made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone, but also that I and others like me, the so-called middle class, was completely at the mercy of those who run financial institutions and pension funds and mutual funds. I felt angry that when those who would gamble with the money of millions of people got into trouble, it was the taxpayer who bailed them out. What a sense of helplessness in the face of something that had grave effects for the entire global economy. It was clear to me that the key players in this financial game were not acting in the best interests of their clients, let alone the economy. It seemed that the only motivation for so many of them was to get rich, even if it was at the expense of the entire economy. Now, I want to make it clear that not everyone who works on Wall Street or for investment banks is corrupt. Many, many, many good people with high moral standards are involved in the financial industry. But even they were helpless as the economy spiraled out of control. And I wonder how this could be. You see, I want to believe in the better selves, that people will mostly act in the interests of the greater good, assuming first that their basic needs have been met. I want to believe that each cog in the wheel will be diligent in their duties and look out for the interests of all if they're adequately compensated and respected. I want to believe that if we make justice a priority, everything else will fall into place. The Big Short made me realize how wrong I am. And it leaves me wondering about morality and how faith can guide us in the modern world. In 1944, Reinhold Niebuhr wrote a book called Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. Reinhold Niebuhr was perhaps the most influential Protestant American theologian of the post-war era. He was kind of a celebrity theologian back at a time when the church and God were very much in the cultural psyche. And he would appear on television and give interviews in magazines. He was really well known, probably best known for authoring The Prayer of Serenity, which is used by Alcoholics Anonymous. But for theology students like me, Niebuhr's great contribution is in how he translates theological ideas into the modern world, and particularly his critique of liberalism, which became suspect after the rise of Nazism and the naivety of liberal people and countries who could not believe what was happening. In his own life, he moved from this liberalism to what he calls realism in regards to human nature and the political structures that accompany this somewhat more pessimistic view of human nature. He was one of the first to view sin as a social thing, as pride, with selfish self-centeredness as the root of evil. And this is really at the heart of his book, Children of Light and the Children of Darkness. He takes this title from our text that we read today, Luke 16, verse 8, where the master says, in our reading it was, that's how it is. Those attuned to this evil age are more clever in dealing with their affairs than the enlightened are in dealing with their affairs. In the King James Version, the verse reads, "And the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light." So the central thesis of the book is that in a democracy, we are better off if we have neither a too pessimistic view nor a too optimistic view of human nature. What he means is that humans wrestle as individuals and as a community between self-interest and the general interest, or what we know as the greater good. To him, systems that are too ideological, which rely either too much on the good nature of people or too much on the self-interest of people, fail in practice because their followers don't understand that there is a tension when they develop their political systems. So the children of light, according to Niebuhr, are those who believe that self-interest is curtailed somehow by a universal law. So if we organize our society in a way that is just for all and give justice to all the people, society will flourish. And the children of darkness are those who know that there is no law beyond their own will and their own self-interest. So he says that in our gospel reading, the children of darkness are evil in their selfishness and their self-centeredness, but they are wise because they understand the power of self-interest and they use it to their advantage. Our steward knew that if he gave a deal to those people who owed his master money, that they would be good to him later. Self-interest was at the basis of how he ruled. The children of light, on the other hand, are virtuous, okay, because they appeal to this universal law, the best selves in us, that lean towards this greater good. But they're foolish because they don't know the power of self-will, self-centeredness, and selfishness, even in themselves. So to Niebuhr, our modern society has been built by the children of light. and it is morally sentimental, with the belief that given the right structures or opportunities, people are going to do the right thing and think of the greater good, while the children of darkness are morally cynical, and they believe that people will always act in their own interests. So in effect, the children of darkness take advantage of the naivety of the children of light, and they game the system to their own advantage. And that's what our dishonest steward did in the text, because he knew if he was going to survive, after being discharged from his position, he needed to make friends with the debtors so that they could take care of him and find another position. So note that his cleverness is actually celebrated by the master. If we use Niebuhr's categories, children of darkness, children of light, in relation to this movie, The Big Short, the children of light believed that the government was paying attention and would look after their investments in their pension plans. They believed that home ownership was a right of all people and that people would never default on their mortgage, and that investments that they made in mortgage-backed securities were safe. They saw a system built on trust and integrity and honesty. And meanwhile, the children of darkness were only interested in making money, in profiting off the naivety of the children of light, and in protecting their own interests at the expense of the economy. And in the end, trillions of dollars were lost. Some banks failed, others were bailed out. And pension funds and retirement funds were depleted, businesses failed, unemployment rose, wages stagnated, and the world entered a great recession from which many say we have yet to fully recover. The Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission concluded that the financial crisis was avoidable and was caused by widespread failures in financial regulation and supervision, dramatic failures of corporate governance and risk management at many systemically important financial institutions, a combination of excessive borrowing, risky investments, and lack of transparency by those financial institutions, ill preparation and inconsistent action by government that added to uncertainty and panic, a systemic breakdown in accountability and ethics, collapsing mortgage lending standards, and mortgage securitization pipeline. And it goes on and on and on. And in essence, there was an across-the-board failure to regulate and oversee, and insufficient attention paid to those whose self-interest was unbounded by caution, or what they call middle-class morality. And although our text today about this dishonest agent deals with a scenario that is not nearly as complex as our financial meltdown, it illustrates the bare facts quite well. Again, the agent uses the system and his position to his own advantage. The master has not paid enough attention to what is going on, and when the game is up, the agent ignores the interests of the master who he serves, compromising the master's wealth in order to achieve a good end for himself. And Jesus responds to this kind of thinking is to give some insight into the true purpose of money. He says it should be used to strengthen friendships, to provide opportunities for being generous and kind. He says that eventually money's not going to be any good to you, but the relationships you formed by your generosity will prepare you for heaven. I would say the relationships you form with your generosity moves into the next generation and the next, and benefits those in all the ages to come. Jesus makes it clear that integrity is important in the small things as well as the big. If you can't handle your money, if you can't treat with respect the riches that have been entrusted to you by others, then they will never trust you with their lives, with personal relationships that really bring life to you and to the community. And then he makes this statement that is so powerful. You can't serve two masters, Because when conflict arises, you will hate the first and love the second, or you'll service one and despise the other. And he says, one master is God and the other is money. You can't serve them both. You'll notice that the Pharisees begin to mock Jesus. The text says they really loved money. And Jesus tells them they've made their choice. They are more interested in appearances and looking good than they are about pleasing God. Their values are not God's values. In some ways, this passage seems like an indictment of the capitalist system. And maybe it is, as it's being practiced in our modern age. But I think it's important to remember that to thinkers like Adam Smith, who was considered the father of modern economics, this whole system relies on individuals who, yes, operate of self-interest, but they unintentionally benefit the whole by the movement of goods and services. He calls this the invisible hand that moves the process towards a common good. It depends for success, according to Adam Smith, on morally upright people. Niebuhr says that Smith is one of the children of light because of his optimistic views of human nature and his belief that self-interest will ultimately result in common good. He says that children of darkness have been able to take Adam Smith's ideology and corrupt it to diminish regulation, arguing that the free market finds its own balance. But what Jesus says, and what The Big Short illustrates, is that when you have people in the system who only care about themselves and making money, the whole thing can come crashing down. Of course, the reaction to the financial crisis has resulted in the Occupy Wall Street movement, which has rolled into something called the Let Justice Roll movement. And it's a renewed conversation about income inequality and the excesses of financial institutions. That's all in our conversation now, and it wasn't before the crash. But unfortunately, as much as light has been shed on these practices, most of them still continue. So what about us? Are we to become socialists? Well, Niebuhr would say that this too is folly, because it also relies on generous souls and leaders who are not self-interested. And we know that we struggle within ourselves and within our culture between wanting to be safe and maximizing our own security by accumulating wealth, which is our self-interest, and our desire to help others and make sure we live in a society that is governed in a just way. We have that conflict in ourselves. But Jesus makes it clear we can't serve God and money. For Jesus' followers, building relationships, caring for each other, and promoting justice are foundational for a society that respects all people. I'm not suggesting that making money is wrong, but making that the focus of your life, even at the expense of your relationships and your integrity, cannot possibly serve you or the society in the end. As Christians, we are called to consider the greater good. But we also need to be very clear about how each of us has a tendency to look after ourselves before all others. Understanding this tension doesn't preclude making money, even a lot of money. What it does insist is that we be honest with ourselves and our own inclinations towards self-interest, as well as keep our eyes open to those who surround us, who are suffering or failing in some way, and how our actions affect their lives. We need to know when we've crossed the line as people and as a culture, and that can only happen when we hold everyone in our care. Because in the end, it's not how much money we've made or how much we've acquired that will be the measure of our lives. In the end, we will be judged by the quality of our relationships and our personal integrity. We serve God, not money. And that is what leads to a truly rich life.